The rain on Verdun 9 did not wash things clean. It coated them. Ryland dragged himself out of the smoking crater of his survey shuttle and wiped a slick, translucent substance from his face. It felt less like water and more like warm, thinned oil. It smelled of ozone, burning plastic, and something cloyingly sweet, like rotting jasmine. He stumbled, his boots sinking into a carpet of moss that seemed to shudder under his weight. His chest ached where the safety harness had bitten into him during the descent, but his limbs were working. He checked his hands, 10 fingers, shaking. But there, damn it. Damn the corporate survey schedule and damn the budget cuts on the atmospheric stabilizers. Ryland tapped the hard light interface on his left wrist. The screen flickered into existence, projecting a holographic orange cone into the humid air. He squinted at the readout. Status: critical. Location: error. Nearest outpost: 3,000 light years. He tapped the navigation tab. The map spun wildly. According to his wrist unit, he was currently floating in the middle of a nebula in the Andromeda sector. A second later, the map insisted he was deep underwater on Earth. "Stop it," Ryland muttered to the machine. He looked up. The jungle was waking up around him, agitated by the violence of his crash. The trees here were titanic, twisting spires of dark wood that looked less like bark and more like muscle fibers. High above, where the canopy strangled the sky, bioluminescent veins pulsed with a faint, rhythmic blue light. It was beautiful in the way a tiger is beautiful, breathtaking, provided you are behind glass. Ryland was not behind glass. He was inside the throat of the beast. He began to walk, simply because standing still felt like waiting to be digested. He had to find high ground. If he could get a signal above the canopy, maybe the distress beacon would actually ping a relay satellite instead of bouncing back as static. 20 minutes into the trek, Ryland realized the planet was not just ignoring his technology, it was actively messing with it. He paused to check his vitals. The biomonitor claimed his heart had stopped beating 40 minutes ago. He checked the compass. North was spinning in a lazy circle. He tried to pull up a recorded survival manual, but the audio file distorted, slowing down until the narrator sounded like a demon groaning from a well. "Great," Ryland whispered. "Even the ghosts are broken." His stomach gave a violent lurch, reminding him he had not eaten since the orbital station. He looked around. The jungle was a riot of color, most of it signaling poison, but surely something here was edible. He raised his wrist unit again and pointed the scanner at a patch of fuzzy, peach-colored mounds growing on a fallen log. "Analyzing," the AI voice chimed. It sounded cheerful, a stark contrast to the oppressive, humid silence of the woods. "Species unknown. Biological composition matches Terran fungal proteins. Toxicity levels: negligible. High caloric density. Safe for consumption." Ryland let out a breath of relief. Finally, a win. He knelt, reaching out to scoop up a handful of the moss. It looked soft, almost like rising dough. "Safe for consumption," he repeated, reassuring himself. His fingers brushed the fuzz. Instantaneously, the peach-colored mound split open, revealing rows of needle-thin, translucent teeth. It wasn't a plant. It was a mouth. The thing lunged, snapping shut on the air where Ryland's fingers had been a millisecond before. He scrambled backward, falling onto his rear as the colony of mouths hissed at him, vibrating with hunger. "Safe for consumption," Ryland yelled at his wrist. "It tried to eat my hand." The AI paused. Correction. Subject appears to be predatory mimicry. Not recommended for ingestion. Would you like to play a game of chess while you wait for rescue? Ryland scrambled to his feet, wiping mud from his pants. No, I would not like to play chess. He turned off the audio interface. He was on his own. He pushed deeper into the brush, drawing the small survival laser from his hip holster. It felt like a toy against the scale of these trees. The shadows were lengthening, turning from gray to deep violet. The blue pulses in the vines grew brighter, creating a disorienting strobe effect that made movement look jerky and unnatural. He felt eyes on him. It was a primal sensation, an itch between his shoulder blades that had nothing to do with sensors or logic. He stopped, gripping the laser handle tighter. "Hello?" he called out. His voice didn't echo. The jungle absorbed the sound instantly, swallowing it whole. He turned in a slow circle, nothing but vines, wet leaves, and the pulsing blue light. Then he saw her. She was standing on a thick root branch 6 feet above the ground, perfectly still, like a statue carved from the jungle itself. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin was a pale, shifting slate gray, marked with geometric patterns of white paint, or perhaps natural pigment, that swirled down her arms and across her throat. Her hair was braided tight against her skull, woven with small, dark feathers and beads that looked like teeth. She was terrifying. And Ryland's brain traitorously noted she was stunning. She held a weapon in her right hand, a long, curved knife that wasn't metal. It looked like bone, but the edge shimmered with a glassy obsidian sheen. She was crouched low, balancing with an impossible grace, watching him. She didn't look like a savage staring at a god. She looked like a hunter staring at a puzzle. Ryland lowered his laser slowly, raising his empty hand. He remembered the first contact protocols from his training modules. Appear non-threatening. Establish communication. Do not smile with teeth showing, as this is a threat signal in 60% of known cultures. He tapped his translator collar, praying the battery hadn't dissolved in the rain. "I am Ryland," he said, enunciating clearly. "I mean no harm. I come in peace." The collar hummed, processing the linguistic matrix of the sector, and spat out a string of guttural, clicking sounds. The woman's head tilted to the side. Her eyes were large. The irises a shocking, luminous gold with no whites, just pools of liquid amber. She looked at his boots, then his laser, then his face. The translator crackled again. Ryland hoped it had translated the peace part correctly. Instead, the device gave a high-pitched whine and blurted out a correction in the local trade tongue that Ryland's earpiece reverse-translated as, "I am Ryland. I mean no hard. I come in peas." The woman snorted. It was a very human sound, a sharp exhalation of amusement that she immediately suppressed. Her expression tightened back into a mask of indifference. She hopped down from the root. She landed without a sound, not a thud, not a splash. Silence. Ryland took a step back. She was taller than him by 2 inches, lean and corded with muscle. She smelled of rain and wood smoke. She circled him, the bone knife held loose but ready. She poked the tip of the blade toward his chest, stopping an inch from his flight suit. She was testing his reaction time. He didn't move. He was too busy trying not to hyperventilate. "You are loud," she said. Her voice was husky, accented but intelligible. She spoke the trade tongue of the outer rim, though the words felt heavy in her mouth, unused. Ryland blinked. "You speak standard?" She ignored the question. She circled behind him, checking his back. "You walk like a wounded thresher beast, stumbling, breaking things." "I crashed," Ryland said, turning to keep her in view. "My ship. My vessel fell from the sky." "I know," she said. "I heard it scream." She stopped in front of him again. Her golden eyes narrowed, scanning his face, looking for something specific. She looked at his soft hands, his clean-shaven jaw, the lack of scars on his neck. "You are soft," she observed. "I'm a scientist," Ryland said defensively. "Or a contractor. I study life." She looked unimpressed. She stepped closer, invading his personal space with a fearlessness that made his breath hitch. She was studying him like a myth that had walked out of the trees and disappointed her. Then she said it. Her voice dropped an octave, losing the edge of command and replacing it with something flatter. "Colder. I have not seen a man in 7 months." Ryland felt a jolt of confusion. He looked at her, the feral beauty, the isolation, the intensity of her gaze. His brain, steeped in bad adventure novels and loneliness, made a frantic, hopeful leap. He smiled, a charming, crooked expression that usually worked at corporate mixers. "Well," he said, his voice dropping to match hers, "that is a long time to be alone. I'm happy to break the streak." The change in her was instantaneous. The curiosity vanished. Her face became a stone wall. "It was not a complaint," she said. "It was a measurement of peace." Ryland's smile died. "Oh." She turned her back on him, dismissing him as a threat and categorizing him as a nuisance. "Follow," she commanded. "If you stay here, the rot flies will lay eggs in your ears while you sleep." She started walking. She didn't look back to see if he was coming. Ryland scrambled to catch up. "Wait. Who are you? Where are we going?" "I am Sava," she said, not breaking stride. "And we are going to see if you deserve to live." Sava moved through the jungle like smoke. She didn't push branches aside. She seemed to slide between them. Ryland, by contrast, felt like he was fighting a war with every bush. "Step where I step," Sava called over her shoulder. "Yo, do not touch the blue vines." "Why?" Ryland asked, reaching out to steady himself against a thick tree trunk wrapped in the glowing creepers. "Do not." His hand slapped against a cluster of the blue vines. Immediately, the light inside the plant flared from a calm cobalt to a violent, angry crimson. A shiver ran through the tree, vibrating into the ground. A high-pitched shriek emitted from the plant itself, like a tea kettle screaming. Ryland jerked his hand back. What was that? Sava stopped. She spun around, her eyes wide with genuine alarm. "You rang the dinner bell," she hissed. The jungle floor erupted. 50 yards to their left, the mud exploded upward. Something massive was moving under the surface, tearing through the root systems like a torpedo through water. "Run!" Sava shouted. Ryland didn't need telling twice. He sprinted after her, his boots sliding in the muck. The screaming of the vines was spreading, a chain reaction of alarm calls lighting up the forest in waves of red. "What is it?" Ryland gasped. "Lungs burning." "Heat stalker," Sava yelled. "Do not stop." The ground behind them heaved. Ryland risked a glance back and instantly regretted it. The creature had breached the surface. It was a nightmare of segments and chitons, sleek and black, moving on a dozen scuttling legs. It had no eyes, just a row of heat-sensing pits along its snout, which was currently gaping open to reveal rows of serrated hooks. It was fast, much faster than a human. Sava took a sharp left, diving through a narrow gap between 2 boulders. Ryland followed, scraping his shoulder against the stone. "It can hear your heart," Sava said. "It tracks the warmth of your blood." Ryland's heart was currently hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Great. I'm a beacon." They hit a dead end, a sheer drop into a ravine filled with fog. The creature was crashing through the undergrowth behind them, snapping trees like matchsticks. Sava grabbed Ryland's collar and threw him down into a hollow beneath the roots of the giant tree at the cliff's edge. It was a tight squeeze, filled with wet mulch and darkness. She dove in on top of him. "Quiet," she ordered. She pressed him down into the mud, Her body covered his, pinning him to the earth. The creature shrieked, a sound of frustrated hunger that vibrated in Ryland's teeth. It was close. He could smell it, a scent of ammonia and old copper. Sava's hand clamped over Ryland's mouth. Her other hand pressed flat against the center of his chest, right over his heart. She leaned her forehead against his, her golden eyes locking onto his terrified blue ones. "Breathe with me," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Slow, cold, be a stone." She took a long, shallow breath, expanding her diaphragm slowly. Ryland tried to copy her, but his adrenaline was spiking. He was shaking. The creature's footsteps thudded right above their heads. Dust and bark rained down on them. The heat-sensing pits were searching. Sava's grip on his chest tightened, her nails digging in through his flight suit. Her eyes were fierce, demanding compliance. She exhaled slowly, a long, controlled stream of air. Ryland forced himself to focus on her, not the monster, her. The gold of her irises, the smear of white paint on her cheekbone, the weight of her body pressing him into the cool mud. He matched her rhythm. Inhale, hold, exhale. The creature hissed, pausing directly over the root hollow. It snuffled at the air, confused by the sudden drop in agitation. Sava didn't blink. She held Ryland's gaze, anchoring him. For a moment, the terror receded, replaced by a surreal, intense awareness of the woman on top of him. He could feel the slow, powerful beat of her heart against his ribs. He could feel the warmth of her palm. It was an intimacy that had no right to exist between strangers, forged in the space of 3 seconds by the threat of death. Above them, the creature let out a chittering growl of disappointment. It scurried away, the sound of its legs fading into the distance. They lay there for another full minute, locked together in the mud. Sava pulled her hand from his mouth but didn't move off him. She studied his face again, her expression unreadable in the gloom. "You panic loudly," she noted. Ryland let out a shaky breath. "I'm a quick learner." She rolled off him and sat up, wiping mud from her knees. She looked at the smear of dirt on her hand, then back at him. The contempt was gone, replaced by a grudging assessment. "You did not scream." She granted, "That is something." She offered him a hand. Ryland took it. Her grip was calloused and strong, pulling him to his feet effortlessly. "We are close to the perimeter," she said. "Do not touch anything else." "I won't touch anything," Ryland promised. "I won't even breathe unless you tell me to." "Good," she said. They walked for another hour, the jungle shifting around them. The red alarm lights of the vines faded back to a watchful blue. Sava led him to a wall of vegetation that looked too dense to pass. She reached into a pouch at her belt, pulled out a handful of gray powder and blew it onto the leaves. The wall shivered and parted, the branches unweaving themselves to create an archway. "Welcome to Keitha," Sava said. Ryland stepped through. He had expected a campsite, maybe some tents, a fire. He was wrong. The Keitha settlement was a masterpiece of biological engineering. It was built into the canopy of a massive grove of ironwood trees. The walkways were grown, not built, woven from living branches that formed bridges between the trunks. The dwellings were pods of amber-colored resin and wood, glowing with internal light, hanging like ornaments from the high boughs. Below, on the forest floor, warriors stood guard. They wore armor made of chitin and leather, holding spears that hummed with the same energy as Sava's knife. As Sava led Ryland into the central clearing, silence fell over the camp. Dozens of pairs of golden eyes turned to watch them. A group of elders waited near a central fire pit that burned with a smokeless white flame. They were all women, their hair white, their markings intricate. Sava brought Rylan to a halt before them. "You brought a stray," said the woman in the center. She was old, her skin like crumpled parchment, leaning on a staff topped with a glowing crystal. "This is dangerous, Sava." He fell from the sky. "Matriarch," Sava said, her head bowed in respect but her voice firm. "He triggered the listening vines and survived the skulk." "Because you saved him," the matriarch countered. "Because he is a puzzle," Sava corrected. The council murmured. A younger woman with a scar across her nose stepped forward. She looked at Rylan with open hostility. "He is a man," she spat, "and he is an off-worlder. We should cut his throat and feed him to the roots before he brings the others." Rylan's translator caught up, delivering the death threat in a polite monotone. Rylan cleared his throat. He stepped forward, raising his hands. "I'm not a soldier," he said, addressing the matriarch. "I am a xenobiologist, a scientist. I study plants. My shuttle was sabotaged. I didn't choose to come here." "Sabotage?" the scarred woman scoffed. "A convenient lie." "It's the truth," Rylan insisted. "My navigation was locked. My distress beacon is jamming itself. Someone wanted me to crash." The matriarch looked at him, her eyes narrowing. She stepped closer, raising her staff. "Step toward the stone," she commanded, pointing to a monolith of black rock standing at the edge of the firelight. It was carved with glyphs that hurt Rylan's eyes to look at. Rylan hesitated, then looked at Sava. She gave a microscopic nod. He walked toward the stone. As he got within 5 feet, the rock began to hum. It wasn't a mechanical sound, it was a resonance, a deep vibration that Rylan felt in his teeth. The glyphs on the surface flared with a sudden, soft, white light. The tribe gasped. The warriors tightened their grips on their spears. The matriarch's eyes went wide. She looked from the stone to Rylan, fear and awe warring in her expression. "It sees him," she whispered. "The engine remembers the shape of his people." Sava looked at Rylan, her suspicion returning, but deeper this time. "What are you?" "Rylan?" "I told you," Rylan said, unnerved by the humming rock. "I'm just a contractor." Just then, a sound cut through the murmuring of the crowd. It came from the sky, a low, rhythmic thrumming. It sounded like a giant insect, mechanical and relentless. Rylan froze. He knew that sound. It was the signature frequency of a corporate hunter-killer drone. Sava looked up, her knife instantly in her hand. "Is that your rescue?" she asked, her voice tight. Rylan looked at the sky, where a trio of dark shapes were silhouetted against the twin moons. They were circling, grid-searching the jungle. They were hunting. "No," Rylan said, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "That's the cleanup crew." Sava looked at him, then at the drones. She made a decision. Get him out of sight. She ordered the warriors. The 7 months of peace are over. She grabbed Rylan's arm, not gently, and pulled him toward the shadows of the resin pods. "Try not to die." "Rylan," she whispered, "it would be a waste of a good mystery." The hospitality of the Ketha felt less like staying at a hotel and more like being a prized exotic animal in a well-maintained zoo. Rylan sat on the edge of a sleeping mat woven from dried river reeds, staring at the walls of his quarters. It was a resin pod suspended 30 feet above the ground, glowing with a soft amber warmth. It was beautiful, architectural, and completely devoid of a door handle. A Ketha warrior stood outside the archway at all times, silent as a shadow, spear tip resting on the woven walkway. They had taken his flight suit to clean it, or burn it, he was not sure which, and replaced it with a loose tunic made of plant fibers that felt surprisingly like silk. They had fed him a bowl of something that tasted like spicy porridge and purple grapes. He was clean, he was full, and he was terrified. The first 2 days passed in a blur of observation. The Ketha watched him. He watched them. Children peeked over the edges of the walkways, giggling until their mothers pulled them back. He was the alien here, the soft, pale thing that had fallen from the stars. On the third morning, Ryland decided he needed to be proactive. If he was going to survive, he needed allies, not just a jailer. He saw an older woman approaching his pod, flanked by 2 guards. She wore a heavy mantle of iridescent beetle wings and carried herself with an air of absolute authority. It was one of the council elders, likely coming to inspect the prisoner. Ryland scrambled up, dusting off his tunic. He remembered a gesture Sava had made to the matriarch, a lowering of the head and a sweeping motion of the hand toward the heart. He wanted to show respect. He wanted to show he was civilized. He stepped forward as the elder entered. He bowed low, sweeping his hand not just to his heart, but extending it outward, palm open, toward her, trying to emphasize his openness. "Greetings, honored one," Ryland said, his translator humming. "I offer you myself and my service." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a tank. The elder froze. The guards stiffened, their knuckles whitening on their spear shafts. The elder's eyes went wide, and her mouth opened in a perfect O of shock. She looked from Ryland's outstretched hand to his face, a flush of dark violet rising up her neck. Ryland froze, holding the pose. Had he threatened her? Then Sava appeared. She dropped from the upper canopy, landing between Ryland and the elder with a dull thud. She looked frantic. "Do not listen to him." "Elder Vora!" Sava shouted, waving her hands. The elder looked at Sava, then back at Ryland, looking scandalized. "He offered me his open palm." "Sava. He offered the nest bond." Ryland straightened up, blinking. "The what?" Sava shoved Ryland back toward his sleeping mat. "Hard. He is brain sick. Elder!" The fall from the sky shook his skull meat. "He does not know what he says. He thinks you are his grandmother." "His grandmother?" The elder looked affronted, smoothing her beetle-wing cloak. "He is confused." "Yes, extremely confused," Sava said, glaring at Ryland. "He has void madness. I will discipline him." The elder sniffed, gave Ryland a look of pity mixed with relief, and retreated down the walkway. As soon as she was gone, Sava whirled on him. "You tried to marry Elder Vora," she hissed. Ryland's jaw dropped. "I did what?" "The open palm," Sava mimed the gesture aggressively. To offer the hand palm up is to ask for the sharing of a sleeping mat. To offer the heart is respect. To offer the hand is proposition. "Oh," Ryland said, his face heating up. "I thought it meant friendship." "If she had accepted, you would be weaving baskets for her for the rest of your life," Sava said, though the corner of her mouth twitched. "She is very demanding. You would not have lasted a week." "I assume the brain-sick excuse covers me?" Ryland asked. Sava sighed, sliding her bone knife back into its sheath. "For now. But you must learn to walk before you try to run. Skyman." The incident broke the ice, or at least chipped it, over the next few days. Sava's watch over him shifted from guarding a prisoner to training a liability. She took him to the lower platforms, away from the prying eyes of the village. The lesson was simple. Silence. The jungle hears intention, Sava explained. She moved across a bed of dry leaves without making a sound. It was uncanny. She did not just step lightly. She seemed to flow around the friction of the world. When you walk, you strike the ground like you are angry at it. You must ask the ground for permission. Rylan tried. He stepped gingerly, but a twig snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Sava winced. No. You are tense. The Ketha do not fight the gravity. We accept it. She made him take off his heavy boots. Barefoot, the damp wood of the platform felt slick and alive. Close your eyes, she ordered. Rylan obeyed. Tell me where I am. He strained his ears. The jungle was a cacophony of chirps, buzzes, and distant roars, but close by, he heard nothing. Left, he guessed. Something tapped his right shoulder. He jumped. You are deaf to the moods, Sava said, her voice coming from right behind his ear. You listen for noise. You should listen for the silence. When a predator moves, the insects stop. The silence is the warning. It was grueling work. Rylan was sore, sweaty, and constantly humiliated by his own clumsiness. But in return, he taught her. He showed her his wrist unit. The screen was glitching, showing static snow, but the power cell was stable. The planet hates the logic of the maps, Rylan explained, sitting cross-legged with Sava, but it does not hate the energy itself. See this? He pulled a small sonic dampener from his belt. It was a tool for quiet engine repair. If I turn this on, it creates a bubble of silence. It cancels vibration. Sava looked at it skeptically. It is a machine. The vines will eat it. Not if we shield the frequency, Rylan said. He adjusted the modulation dial. It's not magic. It's just physics. The jungle reacts to aggressive signals. This is just a whisper. He activated it. The ambient hum of the forest vanished instantly, replaced by a profound artificial quiet. Sava's eyes widened. She reached out, passing her hand into the field of silence, then back out. It is like holding your breath without dying, she whispered. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since the crash. You are not a warrior, Rylan, but you are clever. I have to be, Rylan said, turning the device off. I'm squishy. Everything here has teeth. Why did you come? Sava asked. Her voice had that flat quality again, the one that hid things. Rylan hesitated. It was a job, a survey contract. The pay was good enough to buy a ticket to the core worlds. I wanted, I don't know, to see something new. Sava looked away, toward the green wall of the jungle. I wanted to see nothing, she said quietly. Rylan remembered the title she had given herself. 7 months. Why were you out there, Sava? He asked softly. 7 months alone. That's not a patrol. That's an exile. She stiffened. Her fingers traced the white markings on her arm. We had a sickness, she said. 2 seasons ago, a ship came, not like yours. A dark ship. They traded with us, gave us metal, gave us sweet water. Then the coughing started. She looked at her hands. My sister was the first to die, then my mother. The matriarch ordered the borders closed, but the anger remained. I was loud. I blamed the elders for letting them in. I fought. She looked up at him, her golden eyes hard. To keep the tribe from tearing itself apart, I took the vow of silence. I left. I am not allowed to return until the jungle washes the anger from my spirit. And has it? Rylan asked. Sava looked at him, a strange, sad smile touching her lips. No, she said. It just made the anger quiet. Their training was interrupted by the reality of their situation. The village was not a sanctuary. It was a cage, and the bars were made of politics. Rylan was brought before the council again, but this time the atmosphere was volatile. The matriarch sat on her dais, looking tired. To her right stood the scarred woman, whose name Rylan learned was Cora. To her left was a man with braids woven into a crest, Taryn, a faction leader who looked at Rylan with hungry calculation. "We cannot keep him," Cora argued, her voice ringing across the platform. "The drones are getting closer. Every day he is here. He endangers the engine. We should give his head to the metal flies and be done with it." "Barbarism," Taryn countered smoothly. "The off-worlders have power. Look at his tools. If we trade him, alive, we could demand weapons, medicine, protection from the other tribes. He is not currency." Sava stepped forward, standing between Rylan and the council. "He is a guest. He is a poison." Cora spat. "You brought him here. Exile. You brought the end of us." "I brought a witness," Sava shot back. "The crash was not an accident. Someone shot him down. If we give him up, we tell the attackers we are complicit." The argument raged. Rylan watched, realizing with a sinking heart that he was just a piece on a board he didn't understand. Taryn wanted to use him. Cora wanted to erase him. And Sava was using him as a shield to protect her people's honor, even if it cost her standing. Suddenly, a horn blew. It was a deep, mournful sound that vibrated through the floorboards. "The perimeter!" a sentry screamed from the high watchtower. "They have breached the decoy wall!" The council dissolved into chaos. Cora grabbed her spear. Taryn shouted orders to his men. Sava grabbed Rylan's arm. "Come! We must move!" They ran along the walkways, the village erupting into organized panic. Warriors poured out of the pods, disappearing into the foliage. Rylan struggled to keep up with Sava's fluid pace. "What's happening?" "Mercenaries," Sava said grimly. "They didn't wait for a trade. They are taking what they want." They reached the edge of the settlement just as the first explosion rocked the trees. It wasn't a bomb. It was a sonic charge, designed to disorient. Leaves rained down like confetti. Rylan peered through the leaves, down below, in the dense undergrowth. Shapes were moving. They were clad in matte black armor, moving with a mechanical precision that contrasted sharply with the fluid grace of the Keitha. "Traps!" Sava yelled to a group of warriors. "Trigger the root snares!" A warrior cut a vine. 30 yards away, a massive net of living creepers whipped upward, snapping tight around 3 of the black-clad figures. The Keitha cheered, but the cheer died in their throats. The mercenaries didn't struggle. Small, spherical drones detached from their shoulders, buzzing like angry wasps. The drones emitted a flash of white-hot laser fire, slicing through the thick vines in seconds. The mercenaries dropped to the ground, weapons raised. "They have thermal," Rylan realized, watching the soldiers aim their rifles at empty bushes where Ketha warriors were hiding. "They can see your heat." He grabbed Sava. "Tell them to mud up. They need to lower their body temperature." Sava relayed the order, a series of sharp bird calls, but it was too late for the forward guard. Plasma fire tore through the trees. It was a massacre. Rylan squinted at the lead mercenary. The soldier paused to reload, and for a second, the sunlight hit the shoulder plate of his armor. There was a logo painted there in gray and crimson, a stylized hawk gripping a planet. Rylan's blood ran cold. "Ares Vantor," he whispered. "What?" Sava asked, pulling him behind a thick trunk as a bolt of plasma scorched the bark. "That insignia," Rylan said, his voice shaking. "That's not just a mercenary outfit. Ares Vantor is a government contractor. They build terraforming engines for the Federation." This isn't a rescue, he realized, the full weight of the conspiracy hitting him. It's an asset recovery. They know what's under the jungle. We cannot stay here. Sava said, "If they find you, they find the entrance to the deep ruins." She looked at the chaos, her people dying, the village burning. Her face twisted in pain, but she shoved it down. "We go to the blue zone," she said. "The blue zone?" Rylan asked. The place where the light is too bright for their heat eyes, Sava said, and where the air is thick enough to drown in dreams. They slipped away from the battle, dropping down a hidden chute that spiraled into the depths of the forest. The sounds of plasma fire and screaming faded, replaced by a low, throbbing hum. The deeper they went, the brighter the world became. The sunlight was gone, blocked by layers of canopy, but the jungle itself was glowing. The moss, the leaves, the bark, everything pulsed with a neon blue luminescence. It was beautiful and headache-inducing. The air grew heavy and sweet. Rylan felt a tickle in the back of his throat. Masks, Sava ordered. She pulled a cloth from her belt, soaked in some pungent herbal mixture, and tied it around her face. She handed one to Rylan. Spores, she warned. They float like glitter. Do not breathe deep. Rylan tied the mask on, but the air was thick with drifting motes of light. They swirled around him, sticking to his skin, melting like snowflakes. They ran until his lungs burned. The blue zone was a labyrinth of giant mushrooms and fern trees that looked like glass. They stopped to rest in the hollow of a glowing rock formation. Rylan slid down the wall, gasping. The mask filtered the worst of it, but the spores were potent. His head felt light. The colors of the jungle began to bleed together. Are you okay? Rylan asked, his voice sounding far away to his own ears. Sava was staring at her hands. Her golden eyes were dilated. I am cold, she whispered. Rylan frowned. It was humid and hot. Why are you cold? Because the fire went out, Sava said, 7 months ago. Rylan blinked. The world tilted. Suddenly, he wasn't in the jungle. He was sitting in a small, cramped apartment in a mega city. Rain lashed against the window. He was eating dinner alone, processed noodles. He checked his comms. No messages. No one cared where he was. The silence of the apartment was deafening. It was a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight on his chest. But it wasn't his memory. It was sharper. He looked at Sava. She was shivering. At the same time, Sava gasped. She looked at him, horror and recognition dawning in her eyes. She wasn't seeing the jungle either. She was seeing a campsite in the rain. She was feeling the ache of sleeping on roots for 200 nights. She was feeling the utter crushing silence of being cut off from everyone she loved, the shame of being the one who survived. Rylan, she whispered, why is your nest so empty? Rylan reached out. Why are you so cold? The spores. They were psychoreactive. They were bridging the gap between them, turning empathy into a sensory input. They scrambled toward each other, driven by a sudden, desperate need to banish the cold and the silence. Rylan's hands found her shoulders. Sava's hands gripped his waist. It was intense. It wasn't just physical. It was a collision of souls. Rylan felt her fierce protectiveness, her guilt, her longing to be held. Sava felt his aimlessness, his desire to matter, his awe of her. They pulled closer. The blue light swirled around them, creating a halo. Sava looked up at him. Her lips parted, the mask pulled down. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a raw, terrifying hunger. You are not a stranger, she breathed. Rylan leaned in. The air between them crackled with static. He could feel her breath on his mouth. He wanted to kiss her more than he had ever wanted to breathe. He wanted to anchor himself to her, to this wild, broken, beautiful woman who carried a knife of bone and a heart of guilt. Sava, he whispered. She leaned up, closing the distance. The ground dropped out from under them. There was a deep, groaning crack, and the jungle floor simply vanished. Rylan shouted, grabbing for Sava. She grabbed his tunic. They fell, tumbling into darkness. Surrounded by falling glowing moss and dirt, they hit a slope and rolled, sliding down a chute of smooth, cold stone. They landed in a heap at the bottom, coughing in the dust. Rylan groaned, checking his limbs, bruised but whole. Sava was already up, crouched in a defensive stance, her knife out. "Where are we?" Rylan asked, standing up and brushing off the glowing dust. Sava didn't answer. She was staring at the walls. They were in a corridor. But it wasn't natural caves. The walls were made of a seamless, pearlescent material that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light, matching the heartbeat of the jungle above. "The old places," Sava whispered. "The roots of the world." Rylan stepped closer to the wall. He raised his wrist unit to scan it. "Warning," the AI chirped. "High energy signature detected." As soon as the AI spoke, the corridor reacted. The lights turned a harsh, angry red. A low hum began to build, vibrating the floor plates. "Rylan, turn it off," Sava yelled. "Too late." The walls emitted a pulse of concussive force. It slammed into Rylan, throwing him backward against the far wall. His vision went white. He couldn't breathe. His heart stuttered, out of sync. He slid to the floor, gasping, clutching his chest. The hum was getting louder, a rising pitch that promised to liquefy his organs. Sava was there in an instant. She didn't try to drag him. She straddled him, pinning him to the floor. She ripped the wrist unit off his arm and threw it down the corridor. "Look at me," she commanded. Rylan's eyes rolled back. He was hyperventilating. The defensive pulse had scrambled his nervous system. Sava slammed her palm against his chest, right over his heart, just like she had in the mud during the chase. "Breathe," she shouted, not with fear. Fear is a weapon here. The walls respond to the pulse of the prey. She leaned down, her face inches from his. "Calm your blood, Skyman, or we die." She took a deep, slow breath, exaggerating the movement. Rylan focused on her. The golden eyes, the white paint, the fierce, demanding life in her. He forced his lungs to obey. Inhale, exhale. As his heart rate slowed, the red light in the walls began to fade. The angry hum dialed down to a watchful stillness. Rylan slumped back, exhausted. "You have a terrible habit of nearly dying," Sava said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm trying to quit," Rylan wheezed. He looked past her, at the wall she had thrown his wrist unit toward. The light was soft again, illuminating a massive mural carved into the surface. "Help me up," he said. Sava pulled him to his feet. They walked to the mural. It was a map, but not of a country. It showed the planet Verdun 9, and beneath the surface, etched in glowing lines, was a network. It looked like veins or roots or wires. They all converged on a central point deep underground, a beating heart of complex machinery. Rylan stared at it, the xenobiologist in him reeling. "It's not a jungle," he whispered. "What?" Sava asked. "The planet," Rylan said, tracing a line of glyphs that looked suspiciously like a schematic. "This isn't natural evolution. Look at the flow. It's a circulatory system. The trees, the vines, the spores, they're the skin." He looked at Sava, his face pale. "The whole biosphere is an engine. Sava, an engineered organism. It was built." Sava looked at the glyphs, her expression unreadable. "Built to do what?" Rylan shook his head. "I don't know. But Ares Vantor knows. That's why they want you gone. You're living on top of the most advanced biotechnology in the galaxy." Suddenly, a faint blue light blinked on Rylan's discarded wrist unit down the hall. It wasn't a malfunction, it was a receipt of transmission. Someone had pinged his location, but his unit was off network. Unless... "Sava," Rylan said slowly. "Who knew the path we took to the blue zone?" Only the council, Sava said, and the perimeter guards. Rylan looked at the blinking light. Someone just sent a handshake signal to the mercenaries. He said, using Keitha biolight codes translated to digital. Sava went rigid. A traitor, she whispered. She looked back the way they had fallen. They know where we are, she said, her voice turning to steel. And now, thanks to you, the mercenaries know the door is open. She grabbed her knife. Run, she said, before the shadows catch up. The hallway was not just lost, it was actively lying to them. Rylan stopped, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a grime-streaked hand. He shone his wrist light down the corridor. 10 minutes ago. The passage had been a straight shot of smooth, pearlescent bone stone sloping gently downward. Now, it twisted sharply to the left in a spiral that made his stomach turn just looking at it. This is impossible, Rylan said, his voice echoing too loudly in the confined space. We passed that exact glowing stalactite 5 minutes ago. We are walking in circles. We are not walking in circles, Sava said, her voice tight with irritation. She was pacing a few steps ahead, her bone knife drawn, scanning the shadows. We are walking in knots, because your mind is loud. My mind is loud, Rylan snapped, frustration overriding his fear. I am not the one who keeps stopping to pray to the moss. I am trying to navigate using basic spatial logic. Logic does not work here. Sava spun around, her golden eyes flashing. This is the intestine of the world. Rylan, it digests intent. You are frustrated, so the path becomes a maze. You doubt the direction, so the direction changes. That is ridiculous, Rylan argued. Architecture doesn't have mood swings. As soon as the words left his mouth, the floor beneath them gave a sickening lurch. The walls seemed to contract, the ceiling lowering by a foot, claustrophobic and threatening. The bioluminescent veins in the stone shifted from a calm blue to a bruised, angry purple. Sava glared at him. You were saying? Rylan shut his mouth. He looked at the ceiling, which was now uncomfortably close to his hair. He took a deep breath, forcing his shoulders to drop. He thought about straight lines. He thought about cooperation. He thought about the fact that he did not want to be crushed to death by an architectural tantrum. I am sorry, he said, forcing the words out. You know the terrain. Lead the way. Sava watched him for a long moment, assessing his sincerity. She sheathed her knife. She exhaled slowly, her posture softening. We go forward, she said quietly. Together. The change was immediate. The purple hue faded back to a soft, watery teal. The ceiling groaned and retracted upward. The spiraling knot of the corridor untwisted itself, revealing a long, straight ramp leading down into the dark. Rylan stared at it. Point taken, he muttered. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the soft scuff of their boots and the rhythmic dripping of condensation. The ruins were vast, a mix of organic curves and technological precision that defied Rylan's understanding of engineering. To break the tension, Rylan pointed his light at a cluster of bulbous, translucent sacs hanging from the ceiling. They pulsed with a faint internal light, and small, winged creatures flitted between them. Fascinating, Rylan whispered. Look at the symbiotic nesting behavior. I should catalog this. Vespula lux eterna, the eternal light wasp. Sava glanced up, unimpressed. Sting cloud, she corrected. Rylan frowned. That lacks nuance. It lacks syllables because you do not have time to say 3 words before they melt your skin, Sava said dryly. And that? She pointed to a beautiful flowering vine with trumpet-shaped blossoms that smelled of honey. Flora melodia, Rylan guessed. Choke rope, Sava said. Rylan stopped by a patch of fuzzy, vibrating moss. Okay, what about this? Vibrobryophyta. It looks soft. Sava didn't even look back. Toe eater. Ryland pulled his foot back sharply. You people really went for literalism in your taxonomy, didn't you? We name things what they do, Sava said. It saves time. Science poetry gets you dead. They rounded a corner and the corridor opened up into a cavernous chamber. The center of the room was dominated not by a console or a computer, but by a massive, stretched membrane of translucent tissue. It was suspended between 4 pillars of dark metal, pulsing with a rhythmic thrum that matched the beating of a heart. The heart skin, Sava whispered. She stopped at the edge of the room, refusing to go closer. Rylan approached it slowly. The membrane was glowing with shifting patterns of light, complex geometric shapes that flowed and reorganized like living fluid. It was an interface. He was sure of it. He reached out a hand. Do not touch it, Sava hissed. It remembers the touch of the makers. You will burn. It's biometric, Rylan murmured. Fascinated. It reads galvanic skin response. It reads intent, just like the hallways. He didn't touch it, but he brought his hand close, hovering inches from the surface. The membrane reacted instantly. Colors bloomed beneath his palm, gold, white, and a deep, resonant indigo. The room hummed, the sound rising in pitch. Suddenly, the membrane became transparent, projecting a 3-dimensional image into the air above it. It wasn't a recording. It was a live feed. Rylan stumbled back. The image showed the jungle surface, viewed from high above, likely from one of the hidden sensors in the canopy. He saw the Keitha village, or what was left of it. Smoke curled from the shattered remains of the resin pods. And in the center of the clearing, he saw the mercenaries. They had set up a perimeter. In the middle of the ring of black-armored soldiers, a group of Keitha were kneeling, their hands bound with zip ties. Rylan recognized the scarred woman, Cora. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead. One of the mercenaries was forcing a headset onto a young Keitha warrior. The boy was thrashing, but the soldier held him down, adjusting a controller on his wrist. They are using them, Rylan realized, horror cold in his stomach. They are forcing them to guide the drones. The planet doesn't attack the Keitha, so they are using your people as camouflage. Sava made a sound that was half sob, half snarl. She stepped forward, staring at the projection. Her hand went to the glass knife at her belt, her knuckles white. This is my fault, she whispered. No, Rylan said, turning to her. This is Ares Vantor. This is the corporation. I left them, Sava said, her voice trembling. 7 months ago. I left them to their anger because I was too proud to stay and fight the rot in my own tribe. And now I am down here, safe in the dark, while my kin are leashed like dogs. She turned to Rylan, her eyes blazing with a mixture of grief and accusation. Why did you come here, Rylan? The truth, not the survey story. Why did you sign the paper? Rylan looked at the projection, at the burning village, and then at Sava. He could not lie to her. The ruin would probably eat him if he did. I wanted the credit, he said softly. He sat down heavily on a protruding root bench. I am 32 years old. Sava, in my field, if you haven't published a major discovery by 30, you are just maintenance crew. I was tired of fixing other people's mistakes. I was tired of being nobody. He looked at his hands. The contract offered triple pay and a guaranteed publication credit. Routine biological survey of a non-sentient zone. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't ask why the pay was so high. I just saw the ticket out of mediocrity. He looked up at her, shame burning in his chest. I came here to make a name for myself, and because of that vanity, I led the wolves to your door. Sava stared at him. The anger in her eyes didn't vanish, but it shifted, becoming something more complex. She understood pride. She understood the cost of it. The last time the Sky People came, she said, her voice hollow, it was not soldiers. It was traders. They brought silver tools and sweet water. My brother, he loved their stories. He wanted to go with them. She looked back at the heart skin. He was the first to get sick. The plague they brought, it turned the blood to water. Half the tribe died in a moon turn. The survivors split. Terran wanted to kill all outsiders. The matriarch wanted to hide. I was the war leader then. Rylan blinked. You? Sava nodded. I wanted to burn the trade ship. I wanted to hunt them down. The tribe was ready to fracture. Civil war was coming, brother against brother. So I made a choice. I took the blame for the anger. I told the council that if violence was the poison, I would take it with me. She touched her chest. That is the 7 months. Rylan, I did not leave to scout. I exiled myself so Terran would not have an excuse to start a war. I have been alone in the silence so my people would not kill each other. The silence between them stretched, heavy with the weight of their confessions. They were both runaways, in a sense. He ran toward ambition. She ran from war. And both of them had failed to outrun the consequences. Rylan stood up. He walked over to her. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. We can fix this, he said. We cannot fix the past, Sava said bitterly. No, but we can break the future they have planned. Before Sava could answer, the room darkened. A low, vibrating pulse echoed through the floor, a different sound than before. It was a search pulse. Sava went rigid. A guardian, she hissed. What? A cleaner beast. It lives in the walls. It hunts by scent. She grabbed his arm, dragging him into the shadows behind one of the massive pillars. Quiet, she breathed. A panel in the far wall slid open. Something slithered out. It was translucent, gel-like, and roughly the size of a minivan. It moved with a terrifying silence, pseudopods extending to taste the air. It had no eyes, but the front of its mass rippled with sensory cilia. It stopped in the center of the room near the heart skin. It rippled, sensing a disturbance. Rylan's heart hammered against his ribs. He held his breath, but his lungs were screaming for air. The adrenaline was making him sweat, and sweat was a scent. Sava saw the panic in his eyes. She saw him getting ready to gasp. She moved. She grabbed the front of his tunic and yanked him toward her. She pressed her back against the pillar and pulled him tight against her body, sliding down until they were crouched in the dark. Binding breath, she whispered, her voice barely a ghost of sound. She cupped his face with both hands, her palms cool against his flushed skin. Give me your air, she commanded silently with her eyes. She pressed her forehead against his. She inhaled sharply, then exhaled directly against his mouth. It wasn't a kiss. Her lips didn't touch his, but it was intimate in a way that shocked Rylan to his core. She was masking his scent with hers. She was forcing him to sync his breathing with her disciplined rhythm. Rylan closed his eyes. He breathed in the air she exhaled. It tasted of mint and fear. He exhaled, and she breathed him in. The creature slithered closer. A pseudopod slapped against the floor inches from Rylan's boot. Sava's grip on his face tightened. Her thumbs traced the line of his cheekbones. Rylan's hands found her waist, gripping the leather of her belt. He could feel the muscles of her stomach contracting with every breath. The physical closeness was overwhelming. In the dark, with death inches away, the barrier between them dissolved. Rylan felt a surge of longing so sharp it hurt, a desire not just to survive, but to stay right here, in this terrifying electric proximity to her. Sava's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him. Her pupils were blown wide. The control was slipping. He saw the hunger there, the sheer physical need of a woman who hadn't touched another living soul in 7 months, crashing into the adrenaline of the moment. Her gaze dropped to his lips, her breath hitched. Rylan leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. The creature let out a wet, gurgling sound. It turned, satisfied that the room was empty, and slithered back into the wall vent. The panel hissed shut. They didn't move. For 3 heartbeats, they stayed locked together, sharing the same air, trembling on the edge of something that would change everything. Then Sava pulled back. She released his face, her hands shaking slightly. She turned her head away, gasping for fresh air, her chest heaving. "It is gone," she said, her voice rough. Rylan sat back, feeling the loss of her warmth like a physical blow. "Yeah, it's gone." They stood up awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. The air in the room felt charged, thick with the things they hadn't done. "Come," Sava said, clearing her throat. "There is a door behind the interface." She led the way, walking faster than necessary. Rylan followed, his mind still reeling from the sensation of her breath on his lips. They passed behind the heart-skin membrane and found a narrow archway. Inside was a small, circular chamber that looked different from the rest of the ruins. The walls here were covered in black glass, etched with millions of tiny points of light. "It's a star map," Rylan said, stepping into the center of the room. He looked up. The constellations were familiar but shifted by millennia of drift. He recognized the galactic arm. He recognized the proprietary trade routes of the core systems. "Wait," Rylan said, pointing to a red line tracing a path through the void. "That's the Magellan Run. That's a human hyperspace lane." Sava looked at him. "How old is this place?" 10,000 years, at least, Rylan said. "Maybe more." "Then how did they know your people were coming?" Sava asked. Rylan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The line on the map ended right here, on Verdun 9. "They didn't just know," Rylan whispered. "They invited us. Or they prepared for us." He noticed a console in the center of the room. It was blinking with a familiar blue light, the same frequency as his survey ship's comms. Rylan approached it. The console wasn't alien. It was a ruggedized black box recorder, bolted onto the alien plinth. It was human tech. "This is a flight recorder," he said, "from my shuttle." "But how did it get down here?" He tapped the playback key. The room filled with a burst of static, and then a voice spoke. It was Rylan's mission handler, a man named Director Kale. "Mission update 49 Alpha. Asset is in position. Descent trajectory confirmed." Rylan froze. That was his launch briefing. The voice continued. "Sabotage protocols active. Navigation lock engaged. Secondary charge set to detonate at altitude 300 to ensure crash consistency." "Consistency?" Rylan whispered. "Primary objective. Seed the biological asset, subject Rylan, into the native zone. Witness credibility required for Section 9 annexation clause." The recording crackled. "Subject is expendable." "Repeat. Subject is expendable. Priority is the awakening of the engine. If the asset survives, he is to be used as a diplomatic lever. If he expires, his body will serve as proof of hostile native action." The recording ended. Rylan stood in the silence, feeling like he had been hollowed out. Expendable. He wasn't an explorer. He wasn't even a scientist. Not really. He was meat. He was a prop thrown into a crash site to justify a war. Sava was watching him. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked sad. They did not just sabotage your ship, she said softly. They spent you like a coin. Ryland slammed his fist onto the console, cracking the plastic casing. They wanted me to crash, he said, his voice shaking with rage. They wanted me to find you. If I live, I'm a witness to your hostility. If I die, I'm a martyr. Either way, they get the legal right to invade. He looked at Sava. The corporation wants the engine, but the politicians, they want the war. They want the excuse to wipe the Ketha out so they can strip mine the biology. Sava stepped closer. She reached out and took his hand. Her grip was hard, calloused, and real. You are not their coin anymore. Rylan, she said fiercely, you are here. You are breathing. And you are holding my hand. Rylan looked at her. The anger didn't leave, but it focused. It sharpened into a cold, hard resolve. You're right, he said. I'm not their asset. I'm their worst nightmare. He looked around the room. We need to get back to the surface. We need to stop that broadcast. He turned toward the exit, but the archway they had entered through groaned. A slab of stone slammed down, sealing them in. Rylan ran to the door, pounding on it. It was solid rock. Trapped, he said. Sava pointed to the other side of the room. There was another door, tall and narrow, pulsing with a faint red light. Above it, glyphs burned in the black glass. Rylan's translator whirred in his ear, struggling with the archaic dialect. What does it say? Sava asked. Rylan read the translation as it scrolled across his retinal display. Offer, he read. Sacrifice. Return. He looked at Sava. It says the only way out is through, but it demands a price. Sava drew her bone knife. She looked at the red door, then at Rylan. Then let us pay it, she said. Whatever it is, we do not stop now. She walked toward the red door, pulling Rylan with her. I haven't seen a man in 7 months, she murmured, a dark humor in her voice. I am not going to let the first one I find die in a closet. The red door did not lead to a room. It led to the inside of their own heads. As soon as the stone slab sealed behind them, the air pressure dropped. The sound of their breathing vanished, replaced by a low, throbbing frequency that vibrated in the marrow of Rylan's bones. The corridor stretched out, impossibly long, the walls dissolving into a mist that swirled with the color of dried blood. This is a defense mechanism, Rylan said, though he could not hear his own voice. It was just a thought that echoed. It's psychotropic. Don't breathe the mist. But they had to breathe. The mist thickened, and the world fell away. Rylan was no longer standing on alien stone. He was standing on a plush gray carpet in a boardroom on the 42nd floor of the Ares Vontor headquarters. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and expensive coffee. He was sitting at the end of a long table. At the far end sat Director Kyle, the man who had signed his contract. Kyle was not looking at him. He was looking at a holographic projection of a budget spreadsheet. The cost of the survey shuttle is negligible, Kyle said, his voice bored. We write it off as a tax loss. But the pilot? Another executive asked. A faceless woman in a suit. Rylan tried to speak. He tried to stand up and shout, I am right here. But his limbs were heavy, as if gravity had increased tenfold. He was glued to the chair. The pilot is a line item, Kyle said, waving a hand. Asset number 49 Alpha. He has no family, no debts, no significant academic standing when if he burns up on entry, we save the cost of the return trip. He is recyclable material. The executives laughed. It was a dry, paper-thin sound. Rylan felt a cold weight in his chest, the crushing, suffocating reality of his own insignificance. This was his deepest fear. Not that he would die, but that his life amounted to nothing more than a rounding error on a corporate ledger. He was small. He was disposable. He was trash. He curled in on himself, the shame burning hotter than the crash. Beside him, in her own private hell, Sava was screaming. She was standing in the center of the Ketha village, but the fires were out. It was raining, a cold gray drizzle that soaked through her leathers. The tribe was gathered in a circle around her. Her mother was there, her brother, the friends she had bled with in the hunts. But they were not looking at her. They were looking through her. "I did this for you," Sava shouted, holding out her hands. "I took the exile so you would not have to fight." Taran, the faction leader, turned his back. "She is not Ketha," he said to the others. "She is a ghost. She belongs to the silence now." Her mother turned away. "We have no daughter. The jungle has taken her." Sava ran to them, trying to grab her brother's arm, but her hand passed through him like smoke. She was a phantom. She had sacrificed everything, her home, her name, her voice, to save them, and they had erased her. She was not a hero. She was forgotten. The loneliness hit her like a physical blow, buckling her knees. 7 months of silence crashed down on her all at once, the nights shivering in the trees, the days speaking only to the wind, the terrible gnawing suspicion that she had ceased to exist. She fell to the ground, curling into a ball, sobbing without sound. Rylan saw her. Through the haze of the boardroom, the image of the weeping woman flickered. The illusion wavered. "Sava," he shouted. "It isn't real." He forced himself to stand. The gravity of his insecurity tried to crush him, whispering that he was weak, that he should just sit down and let the corporation erase him. "No." Rylan gritted out. He pushed through the gray carpet, which turned into mud, and stumbled toward the figure on the floor. "Sava." He reached her. He grabbed her shoulders. Her skin was freezing cold. She looked up at him, her eyes vacant, seeing only the backs of her turning kin. "They don't want me," she whispered. "I am nothing. You are not nothing," Rylan yelled, shaking her. "Look at me." The boardroom and the village flickered, overlapping in a chaotic strobe of memories. "Sava." "Listen to me," Rylan said, his voice raw. "I am a rounding error. I am a disposable asset. I came here because I wanted to be important, because I felt like garbage my whole life." He ripped the truth out of himself, exposing the soft, pathetic underbelly of his pride. "I am terrified that I don't matter," he confessed, the words tearing at his throat. "That is my truth." The confession hit the air like a shockwave. The walls of the corridor groaned. The illusions hated truth. They fed on hidden fear, on the secrets kept in the dark. Sava blinked, the golden light returning to her eyes. She looked at Rylan, this man who was admitting his own smallness to save her. She stammered. "I am afraid I was right to leave," she whispered, the tears streaming down her face. "I am afraid that I am unlovable, that I am only a weapon to be used and put away." The walls shrieked. The mist swirled violently. "We are not weapons," Rylan shouted, pulling her into his arms. "And we are not line items. We are here." He held her tight, pressing his face into her neck. She gripped him back, her nails digging into his tunic, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a dissolving universe. "I see you," Sava said, her voice fierce and broken. "You are not small to me." "I see you," Rylan answered. "You are not alone." They held the embrace, weeping, shaking, stripping away the armor of sarcasm and stoicism they had both worn for years. It was a surrender. They stopped fighting the fear and simply admitted it, sharing the weight of it. And the corridor could not digest it. The illusions shattered like glass. The boardroom exploded into shards of light. The rainy village evaporated. The red mist cleared, sucked away by a sudden warm breeze. They were kneeling on the floor, clinging to each other, gasping for air. The terrifying throbbing noise was gone, replaced by the sound of trickling water. Rylan lifted his head. They were no longer in a hallway. They were in a cavern. But it was unlike any part of the ruin they had seen. The ceiling was high and domed, glowing with a soft amber luminescence that mimicked the late afternoon sun. The floor was covered in thick, soft moss that felt like velvet. In the center of the room was a large, natural pool of steaming water, fed by a waterfall that cascaded down the rock face. The air was sweet, smelling of jasmine and rain. Spores floated in the air, but they were large, lazy drifts of gold that did not sting or hallucinate. It was a sanctuary. Rylan slumped back on his heels, wiping his eyes. "Did we die?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Is this the afterlife?" Sava looked around, her eyes wide. She reached out and touched a floating spore. It burst into a tiny puff of harmless light against her finger. "No," she whispered. "The ruin. It accepted the payment." "The payment? Honesty?" she said. "It wanted to know what we were." Rylan let out a wet, hysterical laugh. He flopped backward onto the moss, staring at the amber ceiling. "Well, I would like to leave a review," he announced to the empty room. 5 stars. Great therapy session. Would not recommend the waiting room. He waved a hand at the ceiling. "Thank you," he shouted deliriously. "Your customer service is terrifying, but efficient." Sava looked down at him. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. A real one, soft and exhausted. "You are the strangest spirit I have ever met. Rylan, you mock the gods to their faces. I'm just polite." Rylan wheezed. Sava knelt beside him. She looked at the water. "We are alive," she said, sounding surprised by the fact. Rylan looked at her. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears. Her hair was coming loose from its braids. She looked wild and shattered and beautiful. "Yeah," he said softly. "We are." He sat up. The adrenaline crash was hitting him hard, leaving him trembling. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else. A clarity. The vision in the corridor had stripped him bare, and Sava had seen him, and she hadn't looked away. "Sava," he said. She turned to him. The humor faded from her face, replaced by an intensity that made Rylan's breath hitch. The line she had said when they first met, "I haven't seen a man in 7 months," hung in the air between them, but the context had shifted tectonically. "7 months," she whispered. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, brushing away a smear of grime. "I told myself I did not need anyone," she said. "I told myself the silence was enough. I was lying." Rylan leaned into her touch. The warmth of her hand was the only thing in the world that mattered. "I don't want the silence anymore," he said. Sava made a small, choked sound. She moved forward, closing the distance. The kiss wasn't like the one in the movies. It wasn't graceful. It was desperate. It was a collision of 2 people who had been starving for contact, who had just walked through their own nightmares and come out the other side. Rylan's hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer. Sava's arms went around his neck, pulling him down into the moss. It was messy and fierce and salty with tears. It was a claiming. "I was so afraid," Sava murmured against his mouth. "I was so afraid you would leave." "I'm not going anywhere," Rylan promised, kissing her brow, her cheek, her lips again. "I am right here. I am staying." The amber light of the sanctuary deepened, casting long, warm shadows over them. The sound of the waterfall drowned out the rest of the universe. They were safe. For this 1 hour, in the heart of the machine that ate worlds, they were simply two people who had found their way home. Rylan woke up to the sound of laughter. It was a soft, rusty sound, like a door that hadn't been opened in a long time. He blinked his eyes open. The amber light had dimmed to a twilight purple. He was lying on the moss, his tunic serving as a pillow. Sava was sitting beside him, her back against a rock, braiding her hair. She was watching him, and she was smiling. "What?" Rylan croaked, his voice thick with sleep. "You snore," she said, like a tree frog with a chest cold. Rylan groaned, rubbing his face. "I do not. That is a biological lie." Sava chuckled again. She finished the braid and tied it off with a strip of leather. Then she leaned over and kissed his forehead. It was a tender, domestic gesture that felt more radical than the life and death struggle of the hallway. "We have to go," she said softly. "The world is still burning up there." Rylan sat up. The memory of the mission briefing, the crash, the betrayal, the mercenaries came rushing back. The sanctuary was a pause button, not a stop button. He looked at Sava. She looked stronger now. The haunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by a steely determination. She wasn't fighting for an abstract idea of honor anymore. She was fighting for something tangible. "Are you ready?" Rylan asked. Sava stood up and offered him her hand. "Yes," she said. "Let us go and tell the truth." The exit from the sanctuary led them up a long, spiraling stairwell that bypassed the shifting corridors of the lower ruins. They emerged into the humid, heavy air of the surface through a hollow tree trunk, miles from where they had entered. It was night. The jungle was screaming. In the distance, toward the Ketha settlement, the sky was lit up with the orange glow of fires. Searchlights from the drones swept back and forth, cutting through the canopy. They ran. They moved with a synchronized rhythm now. Sava didn't need to tell him where to step. Rylan watched her hips and matched her stride. They were a single unit. They reached the edge of the settlement an hour later. The situation was worse than they had feared. The mercenaries had not attacked again. They were waiting. They had surrounded the great central tree, their drones hovering in a menacing ring. But inside the perimeter, the Ketha were fighting each other. Rylan and Sava crouched on a high branch, looking down at the council platform. The matriarch was surrounded by her personal guard. Facing her was Taryn and a large group of warriors. The tribe was split down the middle. "We must survive," Taryn was shouting, his voice carrying over the hum of the drones. "They do not want us. They want the off-worlders. If we give them the Skyman and the exile, they will leave us in peace." "He is lying," the matriarch countered, though her voice sounded frail. "They will not leave. Look at the fires. Mother," Taryn pointed to the burning pods. "We cannot fight the stars. We must cut off the rotten limb to save the tree." Sava tensed beside Rylan. "He is going to surrender us," she whispered. Rylan gripped her arm. "No, he's going to try." He pulled the ruggedized flight recorder from his belt. He had salvaged it from the map room. "Can you get us to the center?" Rylan asked. "Without being killed?" Sava looked at the crowd, then at the mercenaries waiting in the shadows. "I can get us there," she said. "But once we are there, there is no way out." Rylan looked at the black box. "We don't need a way out. We just need a microphone. Let's go." Sava moved. She dropped from the canopy, landing in the center of the platform with a force that shook the boards. Rylan landed a second later, less gracefully, stumbling slightly, but staying upright. The argument stopped instantly. 300 faces turned toward them. Taryn stepped back, startled. You, you speak of rotting limbs. Taryn, Sava said, her voice projecting clear and cold across the clearing. But you are the one holding the axe. Seize them, Taryn screamed to his warriors. Tie them up. The drones are watching. Wait, Ryland shouted. He held up the black box. Taryn's warriors hesitated. They looked at Sava's knife, glowing with the energy of the ruin, and then at the strange device in Ryland's hand. You think they want peace? Ryland yelled, addressing the crowd. You think if you give us to them, they will pack up and go home? He is a liar, Taryn shouted. He is the curse. Ryland hit the playback button on the recorder and cranked the volume to maximum. The voice of Director Kale boomed out over the settlement, amplified by the silent acoustics of the jungle. Mission Update 49. Alpha. Priority is the awakening of the engine. If the asset expires, his body will serve as proof of hostile native action. The crowd murmured. They didn't understand all the words, but the tone, the cold, clinical malice was unmistakable. Ryland stopped the recording. They didn't come for me, Ryland shouted. They crashed me here on purpose. They want an excuse to kill you all. He pointed at the sky, at the hovering drones. They want the engine beneath the roots, and you are in the way. Surrender doesn't mean peace. It means they wait until we are in custody, and then they burn this entire forest to the ground. Taryn looked around. He saw the doubt in his warrior's eyes. He saw the matriarch nodding slowly, understanding the trap. He panicked. Lies! Taryn shrieked. He is trying to trick you. Take them, now! He lunged at Sava himself, his spear raised. At that exact moment, the air above the clearing shimmered. A massive holographic projection appeared, the face of the mercenary commander, the man Ryland had seen in the projection below. Attention, occupants, the commander's voice boomed, drowning out Taryn. We have monitored the return of the targets. You have 1 minute to deliver the male, Ryland, and the female, Sava, to the perimeter. The voice paused, then added the sweetener. Comply, and we will initiate a peaceful relocation of your biomass to a designated reservation zone. Resist, and we commence sanitization. The translation echoed in the clearing. Relocation, sanitization. The Ketha knew these words. They were the words used for cattle. Taryn froze. The promise of safety had been replaced by a promise of a cage. But fear is a powerful motivator. They will kill us all, Taryn yelled, desperation breaking his voice. Give them the sacrifice. He swung his spear at Sava. 2 of his loyalists rushed Ryland. Sava parried Taryn's strike, sparks flying as bone met steel. Ryland scrambled back, dodging a grabbing hand. Stop! The matriarch cried, but her voice was lost in the roar of the crowd. The panic was taking over. The mob surged forward, terrified, willing to trade 2 lives for the hope of survival. Ryland was backed against the central totem. Sava was fighting 3 men at once, her knife a blur of motion, but she was being overwhelmed. We're going to lose, Ryland thought, watching a dozen hands reach for him. And then the planet answered. It started as a vibration in the floorboards, then a deep, resonant groan that seemed to come from the center of the earth. The totem behind Ryland, the massive stone monolith, flared with blinding white light. The vines that wrapped around the platform, the decorative creepers, the structural supports, suddenly snapped taut. They moved with a speed that was impossible for plants. A warrior lunging at Ryland screamed as a thick vine whipped around his ankle and yanked him into the air. Taryn raised his spear to strike Sava, but a branch from the overhead canopy slammed down, pinning his weapon to the ground. The jungle roared, not the animals, the trees. The wind picked up, swirling with glowing blue spores. The ground shook, knocking half the tribe off their feet. The mercenaries' drones overhead wavered, their sensors blinded by a sudden, massive surge of electromagnetic energy rising from the forest floor. Rylan looked at Sava. She was standing amidst the chaos, unharmed, the vines curling protectively around her boots. She looked at him, her eyes wide with awe. "They are not just watching anymore," she shouted over the wind. Rylan looked at the glowing totem, then at the terrified mercenaries retreating from the perimeter as the jungle wall began to close in like a fist. "No," Rylan said, a fierce grin breaking across his face. They picked a side. The jungle had spoken, but the conversation was far from over. The vines that had lashed out to defend Sava and Rylan slowly retracted, slithering back into the loam like satisfied snakes. The clearing was silent, save for the heavy breathing of 300 Ketha warriors and the distant, retreating whine of the mercenary drones. The respite was temporary. Everyone knew it. Rylan stood by the glowing totem, his chest heaving. He looked at the faces around him, faces that had wanted to trade him for safety 5 minutes ago. Now, they looked to him and Sava with a mixture of awe and terrified expectancy. "We cannot stay here," Sava said, her voice cutting through the silence. "The drones were blinded, not destroyed. They will switch to optical targeting. They will come back with fire." Terran, the faction leader who had tried to seize them, was on his knees, rubbing a bruise on his throat where a root had pinned him. He looked up, his eyes full of venom and shame. "You have doomed us, exile," Terran spat. "You made the forest fight your battle, and now the sky people will burn it all to ash." They were going to burn it anyway. "Terran," Rylan said, stepping forward. He held up the black box recorder. "The legal language is clear. Relocation is just a polite word for extinction." The matriarch slammed the butt of her staff against the wooden platform. "Enough," she commanded. "The Sky Man speaks the truth. We have seen the fire in the sky. We have seen the hunger of their machines. The time for trading is past. Now is the time for teeth." She looked at Sava. "You have walked the old paths, daughter. You have survived the silence. What do we do?" Sava looked at Rylan. They shared a look that communicated a plan without a single word spoken. It was the plan they had formed in the sanctuary, a gamble so reckless it made Rylan's stomach turn over. "We do not fight them in the trees," Sava said. "We cannot win a war of attrition against plasma rifles." "Then where?" Terran sneered. "We invite them in," Rylan said. He pointed toward the hidden sinkhole that led to the ruins. "The ruins beneath us are not just a temple," Rylan explained, his voice gaining strength. "They are a machine, a fortress. Sava and I triggered its immune system. It strips technology. It eats signals. If we can lure the main force into the central chamber," Sava continued, "we can use the heart skin to disarm them. The planet will fight them for us." Terran laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You want to lead the wolf into the nursery? That is madness. It is survival," the matriarch said. She looked at Terran. "And unless you have a fleet of starships in your pocket, Terran, you will do as they say." The preparation began immediately. It was a lesson in humility for everyone involved. The tribe, fractured by months of political infighting, had to relearn how to move as one body. Grudges were swallowed, albeit with difficulty. Warriors who had spat at Sava yesterday were now taking orders from her. Elders who looked at Rylan as a contagion were now asking him how to confuse a thermal sensor. It was a chaotic, beautiful, desperate montage of activity. Sava took the lead on the physical defenses. She organized the Ketha into teams, rerouting the bioluminescent moss trails. They dug up patches of the glowing fungi and replanted them in misleading patterns. creating false roads that led straight into quicksand pits or thorn thickets. Rylan worked on the digital camouflage. He stripped the power cores from the damaged resin pods and rigged them into heat emitters. If we cluster these in the dense brush, Rylan explained to a group of young scouts, the drones will think it is a gathering of bodies. They will waste their ammo shooting at batteries. The Ketha children watched him with wide eyes. To them, Rylan was a wizard of metal and sparks. One of the scouts, a boy no older than 12, pointed at Rylan's face. "You are too pink," the boy said. Rylan blinked. "Excuse me?" "You shine," the boy said. "The moon hits your skin. You look like a peeled fruit." Rylan looked down at his pale arms. The boy was right. In a jungle of shadows and greens, he was a beacon. Sava walked over carrying a bowl of crushed berries and mud. She heard the boy and smirked. "He is right. Skyman, you are very loud to the eyes. Sit," she ordered. Rylan sat on a log. Sava dipped her fingers into the bowl. The mud was cool and smelled of iron. She began to paint his face, drawing broad, jagged lines across his cheeks and forehead. "Don't make me look stupid," Rylan muttered, closing his eyes as she worked on his eyelids. "I am giving you the marks of the Night Stalker," Sava said, her voice teasing. "It is a very fearsome lizard. It hides under rocks and eats bugs." The children giggled. Rylan opened one eye. "You are enjoying this too much." Sava paused. Her hand rested against his cheek for a second longer than necessary. "I am enjoying seeing you try to be Keitha," she said softly. "It is a good look on you." She finished the job. Rylan looked at his reflection in a pool of rainwater. He looked ridiculous, a patchwork of gray mud and purple berry juice. But when he stood up, he saw the nod of approval from the warriors nearby. He wasn't just a guest anymore. He was part of the war paint. As night deepened, the political reality of their situation arrived from orbit. Rylan's salvaged comms unit, which he had rigged to a signal booster, lit up with a transmission. It wasn't a military hail. It was worse. A holographic figure projected from the device, a woman in a pristine white suit, sitting at a desk that floated in a void of data streams. She was the Federation negotiator. "Attention, inhabitants of Sector Verdun 9, the woman said. Her voice was calm, bureaucratic, and terrifyingly polite. "This is a notice of annexation under Federation Resource Law 7-4. Due to the discovery of Tier 1 biotechnology within the planetary crust, the legal status of this world has been reclassified." Rylan watched, his blood running cold. He knew this tone. He had sat in meetings where this tone was used to fire thousands of people. The indigenous population, designated Keitha, is hereby classified as non-sovereign biological occupants. You are ordered to vacate the primary excavation zone immediately. Failure to comply will be treated as an act of ecological sabotage. The hologram vanished. Sava looked at Rylan. "Non-sovereign biological occupants. It means you don't own your home," Rylan said, his voice shaking. "It means you don't even own your bodies." He paced the platform, running a hand through his hair. "My employer, Ares Vantor. They didn't just find this place. They filed patents. They have already registered the genetic sequences of the jungle." He looked at the matriarch. "They are not invading a country." Matriarch. In their eyes, they are just clearing an infestation from their property. The brutality of it, the paper-thin legality used to justify genocide, hit the tribe harder than any threat of violence. It stripped them of their dignity. Sava walked to the edge of the platform, looking out at the darkness where the mercenaries waited. "They think we are weeds," she whispered. Rylan walked up behind her. Then let's show them what happens when the weeds fight back. Before the first shot was fired, there was a moment of quiet. The warriors were in position. The traps were set. Rylan and Sava stood alone near the entrance to the sinkhole, the point of no return. Sava was sharpening her bone knife, the rasping sound rhythmic and soothing. Rylan was checking the charge on his laser tool, though he knew it would be useless once they entered the ruin. "Rylan," Sava said, not looking up. "Yeah? If this goes wrong, if the heart skin does not wake, it will wake," Rylan said, forcing confidence he didn't feel. "But if it does not," Sava persisted. She looked up, her golden eyes searching his face. "You should run. You know the tech. You could steal a shuttle." Rylan laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "And go where? Back to the office. Back to the apartment with the empty fridge." He stepped closer to her, ignoring the war paint and the mud and the impending death. "I told you in the sanctuary. Sava, I am done being empty." Sava looked down at her hands. "I am afraid," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I am afraid that I cannot protect them. And I am afraid that loving you is a distraction, that I am being selfish." Rylan reached out and took her hand. "You are fighting for a future, Sava. That's not selfish." He squeezed her fingers. "And as for me, I'm terrified that I am the infection. I brought them here. Every time I look at you, I see the damage my world has done to yours." Sava looked up. Her gaze was fierce. "You are not the infection," she said firmly. "You are the antibody. You are the thing that teaches the body how to fight the new disease." She pulled him close, pressing her forehead against his. "We do not run," she whispered. "We resolve. We choose this. We choose us." Rylan closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of rain and ozone. "I choose you. Always." A flare went up in the distance, a red streak against the black sky. "It has begun," Sava said. The attack was not subtle. The mercenaries had lost patience with diplomacy. They came in a wave of noise and heat. The jungle exploded as plasma rounds tore through the trees, boiling the sap and igniting the undergrowth. But the Ketha were ready. As the black-clad soldiers pushed into the tree line, relying on their thermal sights, they saw hundreds of heat signatures clustered in the bushes. They opened fire, wasting thousands of rounds on Rylan's rigged batteries. While they were distracted, the real Ketha struck. They dropped from the canopy like rain. No war cries, no screaming, just the silent, deadly whistle of blow darts and the thud of heavy spears. Rylan watched from the ridge, his heart pounding. It was terrifying. The mercenaries were professional killers, but the Ketha moved with a grace that defied physics. They bounced off tree trunks, using the recoil of the branches to launch themselves across gaps. But the mercenaries had the numbers, and they had the armor. "Fall back," Sava's voice rang out over the comms channel Rylan had set up. "Lure them to the throat." The Ketha retreated, feigning a rout. They ran toward the sinkhole entrance, drawing the mercenaries deeper into the prepared kill zone. The jungle turned into a glowing maze of war. Spore clouds erupted as warriors smashed unsuspecting puffball mushrooms, filling the air with choking, glittering dust that clogged the mercenaries' air filters. Rylan and Sava waited at the mouth of the ruin. "Hold the line!" Rylan shouted, firing his small laser at a drone that got too close. Suddenly, a group of Ketha broke from the formation, but they weren't retreating. They were flanking the mercenaries, guiding them away from the traps. Rylan squinted. It was Terran's men. "They are helping them," Rylan shouted. "They are showing them the safe path." Sava saw it too. She saw Terran standing on a high root, signaling to the mercenary commander with a bioluminescent torch. He was selling out the ambush. He is leading them past the entrance, Sava realized with horror. He is trying to give them the matriarch directly. Sava didn't hesitate. She sprinted across the clearing, ignoring the plasma fire chewing up the ground around her. "Sava!" Rylan yelled, scrambling after her. Sava reached the root system where Terran stood. He saw her coming and leveled his spear. "Traitor!" Sava screamed, vaulting over a burning log. "I am a savior!" Terran roared. "I am ending the war!" He thrust the spear. Sava twisted midair, the obsidian tip slicing her tunic but missing her skin. She landed inside his guard, slamming her elbow into his chest. Terran stumbled back, gasping, but he was strong. He swung the haft of the spear, cracking it against Sava's shoulder. She went down, crying out in pain. Terran raised the spear for the killing blow. "You should have stayed in the silence." "Niece," he hissed. "Niece." Rylan froze for a split second as he ran. Family. The betrayal wasn't just political, it was blood. Sava looked up at the man who had taught her to hunt, the man who had bounced her on his knee. She saw the fear in his eyes, the desperate, pathetic fear of a man who thought slavery was better than death. She didn't reach for her knife. She reached for the jungle. She kicked out, not at Terran, but at the cluster of sleeping vines behind him. The vines woke up. They lashed out, wrapping around Terran's legs. He screamed as he was jerked backward, suspended in the air. Sava stood up, clutching her shoulder. She picked up her fallen knife. She walked over to him. Terran squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the blade. Sava looked at him. She raised the knife. "Do it!" Terran wept. "Finish it!" Sava slammed the knife into the wood beside his head. "No," she said, her voice cold as ice. "Death is too easy. You will live. You will live to see us win. And then you will face the judgment of the mothers you betrayed." She turned to Rylan. "Now! Into the dark!" They sprinted back to the sinkhole. The mercenaries, seeing their guide incapacitated, refocused on the primary targets. Target acquired. The mechanical voice of the mercenary commander amplified over the battlefield. Push forward. Secure the entrance. It was working. They were taking the bait. Rylan and Sava dove into the sinkhole, sliding down the chute into the cool, blue-lit corridor of the ruins. Behind them, the sound of heavy boots echoed on the stone. "They are in!" Rylan shouted. They ran to the central chamber, the room with the heart-skin interface. The membrane was pulsing rapidly, sensing the intrusion of foreign technology. The walls were humming with that angry, violet light. Rylan ran to the interface. He didn't touch it, but he held his hands close, manipulating the biofields. "Come on," he muttered. "Recognize the threat. Wake up." The mercenaries poured into the room. There were 20 of them, led by a massive figure in heavy assault armor, Commander Vane. They raised their rifles. "End of the line," Vane said, his voice modulated by his helmet. Rylan looked at Sava. She nodded. "Now!" Rylan yelled. He slapped his hand onto the heartskin. He poured everything he had into the touch, his fear, his anger, his desperate need to protect Sava. The membrane screamed. A pulse of pure white energy exploded from the interface. It wasn't an explosion of heat. It was a wave of negation. It passed through Rylan and Sava harmlessly. But when it hit the mercenaries, chaos erupted. The lights on their armor died. Their rifles sparked and sizzled, dead weights in their hands. The drones that had followed them in dropped from the air like stones crashing onto the floor. The biolocks on their exoskeleton suits froze. The soldiers were trapped in their own armor, statues of metal and plastic. Rylan sagged against the console, laughing breathlessly. "It worked," he gasped. "It's an EMP. A biological EMP. Sava stepped forward, her knife ready. "It is over," she said to the frozen commander. "You have no teeth left." Commander Vane stood rigid in his locked suit. But then, a sound came from his helmet, a mechanical whirring that shouldn't have been possible. His arm moved. Ryland's smile vanished. "That's impossible. The field is active." Vane reached into a shielded pouch on his chest. He pulled out a small, jagged object. It looked like a shard of the same black glass as the ruin walls, but it was encased in a silver containment field. "We've been here before," Vane said, his voice calm. "Or at least, our predecessors have." He held up the shard. "An override key," Ryland whispered, "stolen from the first expedition." Vane slammed the shard into the slot on his wrist computer, bypassing the dead circuitry. "System reboot," his suit announced. The red lights on his armor flickered back to life. The other soldiers' suits began to unlock, groaning as the servos re-engaged. "You think you're the first clever primitive to try and trap us?" Vane sneered. "We came prepared for the ghosts." He tapped a command into his wrist unit. The heart-skin membrane turned from white to a sickly, throbbing black. The room began to shake. The hum of the walls rose to a deafening screech. "What did you do?" Sava shouted, backing away. "I just initiated the harvest protocol," Vane said, raising his rifle. "We're not just taking the samples. We're taking the source." Ryland looked at the interface. The glyphs were scrolling frantically, flashing red. "He is waking the engine," Ryland said, horror dawning on him. "But not to defend. He's forcing it to purge." A countdown appeared on the walls, alien symbols ticking down. "If that hits 0, Ryland said, looking at Sava, "it releases the spores. All of them." "Healing spores?" Sava asked hopefully. "No," Ryland said. "The engine can heal worlds, or it can weaponize them. If he forces a purge, it will flood the atmosphere with necrosis dust. It will kill everything on the surface to protect the core." He looked at Vane. "You'll kill us all, even yourself." Vane laughed. "We have extraction waiting in orbit. You don't." He aimed his rifle at Sava's chest. "Say goodbye to your jungle, savage." The countdown ticked. The floor began to split open, revealing a blinding light beneath. The world was waking up, and it was angry. The floor of the central chamber did not just open, it unraveled. The black stone tiles dissolved into a swirling mist of nanites and spores, revealing a chasm of blinding white light beneath. Commander Vane stood at the edge, laughing. His laughter was tinny and distorted through his helmet speakers. "Let it burn!" he shouted. "Let it scrub the slate clean!" The countdown glyphs on the walls were ticking faster. The hum of the facility rose to a scream, a sound that vibrated the teeth in Ryland's skull. Ryland looked at Sava. The room was shaking violently as the ruin began to reconfigure itself for the purge. Corridors were twisting like ringed towels. The gravity was fluctuating, making the loose debris float in the air. "We have to split up," Ryland yelled over the roar. "What?" Sava grabbed his arm, her grip iron hard. "No, we stay together. If Vane holds this room, he controls the broadcast," Ryland shouted back. "I have to go down. I have to get to the core itself, under the interface. You have to keep them off my back." Sava looked at the mercenaries. Their armor was fully rebooted. They were raising their rifles, preparing to slaughter the remaining Ketha defenders who were pouring into the room from the upper tunnels. "If you go down there, you might not come back," Sava said, her eyes fierce. "If I don't go, there is no coming back for anyone," Ryland said. He didn't wait for permission. He grabbed her face, kissed her hard on the mouth, a promise of return, and then turned and jumped into the blinding white chasm. Sava watched him fall. swallowed by the light. Then she turned to Vane, her bone knife glowing with the reflected fury of the engine. "Hold the line," she screamed to her people. "Do not let them follow him." She threw herself at the nearest mercenary, moving with the desperate speed of a woman protecting her heart. Ryland fell for what felt like a mile, but was likely only a few hundred feet. The gravity down here was soft, cushioning his descent like a pillow of air. He landed on a surface that felt like warm, beating leather. He scrambled to his feet, shielding his eyes. Then he was in the core. It was a cathedral of biology. The space was vast enough to house a starship, but there was no metal here. The walls were made of woven, bioluminescent roots as thick as subway trains. They pulsed with a rhythmic, golden light, pumping fluids to the surface. In the center of the chamber hung the engine. It looked like a massive floating nervous system, a complex knot of glowing ganglia and synapses, suspended in midair by threads of light. It was beautiful, terrifying, and undeniably alive. Ryland ran toward it. The air here was thick with spores that tasted like copper and ozone. "Stop!" Ryland shouted at the floating mass. "You have to stop the purge." The engine ignored him. The pulsing light was turning a violent, angry red, matching the countdown above. It was preparing to release the necrosis dust. Ryland reached the central node, a pedestal of living tissue that looked like a sensory organ. "Listen to me," Ryland pleaded. "It's a trick. The override is a lie." The node flared. A wave of psychic pressure hit Ryland, forcing him to his knees. He felt the engine's awareness brush against his mind. It felt ancient, scared, and reactive. It sensed the hostility from Vane's key, and it was reacting with the only defense it had left: total sterilization. "It feels my fear," Ryland realized. "It thinks I am part of the threat." He forced himself to stand. He closed his eyes. He thought about why he was here. Not for the money, not for the fame, but for the woman fighting for her life upstairs. For the tribe that had painted his face with mud. "I am not your enemy," Ryland said, his voice shaking but clear. "I am Ryland. I am scared to death. But I am telling you the truth." The red light wavered. The engine paused. It was technology that demanded integrity. It operated on emotional resonance. Above him, the ceiling rumbled. Vane was trying to brute force the command. "Do not kill them," Ryland whispered to the machine, placing his hand on the wet, warm surface of the node. "Help me save them." High above Verdun 9, in the sterile silence of the Federation orbit, the negotiator sat in her command chair. Her name was Director Holloway, and she was watching the telemetry from the planet's surface with a cool, detached satisfaction. "The purge sequence has been initiated," her pilot reported. "Excellent," Holloway said. She opened a channel to the fleet. "Prepare the containment narrative. As soon as the necrosis cloud hits the atmosphere, we broadcast the distress signal. We claim the indigenous population accidentally triggered a dormant biological weapon. We enact a quarantine and orbital bombardment to prevent the spread." She took a sip of water. It was a perfect plan. A tragedy manufactured to justify an occupation. The history books would call it a sad necessity. "Director," the pilot said, his voice confused. "I am reading a massive energy spike from the surface. It is not the necrosis signal." "What is it?" Holloway asked. "It looks like..." "Neural activity," the pilot said. "Massive, planet-wide neural activity. Back in the core." Ryland was screaming. The connection to the engine was not subtle. It was like plugging his brain into a lightning storm. He could feel the entire planet. He felt the fear of the animals fleeing in the jungle. He felt the rage of the mercenaries. He felt the desperate hope of the Ketha. "This isn't a weapon," Ryland gasped, his knees buckling. "It's an empathy engine." The realization hit him with the force of a revelation. The ancient builders hadn't created a gun. They had created a defense mechanism against exploitation. They had built a machine that forced beings to feel the consequences of their actions. Rylan. He turned. Sava slid down one of the root tendrils, landing beside him. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, and her tunic was scorched, but her eyes were blazing. "They are breaking through," she shouted. "Vane is coming down." Rylan grabbed her hand. "Sava, listen to me. It's not a bomb. It's a broadcast system. It transmits feeling." Sava looked at the pulsing node, then at Rylan. "Can we aim it?" she asked. Rylan nodded frantically. "I think so. If we anchor it, if we give it a target." Vane dropped into the chamber, his boots slamming onto the fleshy floor. 10 of his soldiers landed behind him. "End of the game. Lovebirds," Vane sneered, raising his rifle. "The purge is locked in. 1 minute to midnight." Sava stood in front of Rylan, her knife raised. Rylan pulled her back. "No, Sava, we don't fight him with knives." He looked at Vane. He looked at the cruelty in the man's posture, the casual disregard for life. "We fight him with the truth," Rylan said. He pulled Sava's hand onto the node with his... "Focus on him," Rylan commanded her. "Focus on Vane. Focus on Holloway in the sky. Focus on every single person who signed a paper to kill your world." Sava closed her eyes. She summoned the 7 months of silence. She summoned the grief of burying her mother. She summoned the terror of the drones. "Give it to them," Rylan whispered. They pushed. The engine roared. The red light vanished, replaced by a blinding, transcendent gold. The purge countdown stopped at 3 seconds. Instead of a spore cloud, the engine released a pulse. It passed through the walls of the ruin. It passed through the jungle canopy. It punched through the atmosphere and hit the ships in orbit. It was not a sound. It was a feeling. Commander Vane dropped his rifle. He grabbed his head, a guttural sound tearing from his throat, inside his helmet. Vane wasn't seeing the room anymore. He was seeing the face of the first Ketha warrior he had killed an hour ago. But he wasn't just seeing it. He was being that warrior. He felt the plasma burn through his own chest. He felt the terror of leaving his children behind. He felt the grief of his wife. "No!" Vane screamed, falling to his knees. "Make it stop." The pulse didn't stop. It dug deeper. It forced him to feel the cumulative weight of every life he had ever ended for a paycheck. It was an avalanche of sorrow, a crushing physical weight of guilt that shattered his psyche in seconds. Around him, his soldiers were collapsing. Some were weeping uncontrollably, curled into fetal balls. Others were ripping off their helmets, gasping for air as if drowning in their own shame. In orbit, Director Holloway screamed. She fell out of her command chair, clawing at her chest. She felt the suffocation of a culture being erased. She felt the cold, indifferent cruelty of her own signature on the annexation order, but turned inward. She saw herself through the eyes of her victims, a monster in a white suit. "Pilot," she sobbed. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" But the pilot was weeping over his console, unable to touch the controls because his hands were shaking with the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that he was the delivery system for genocide. In the jungle above, the fighting stopped. Terran, the traitor, fell to the muddy ground. He felt the betrayal from the other side. He felt the heartbreak of his niece, Sava, when he had tried to sell her. He felt the disgust of the ancestors. It wasn't mind control. It was clarity. Violent, undeniable clarity. The engine didn't strip their free will. It just removed the ability to ignore the cost of their actions. In the core, Rylan and Sava held onto the node, anchoring the storm. They were crying too. The pulse moved through them to get to the enemy, and it was exhausting. It is enough, Sava whispered, her voice breaking. They are broken. Rylan nodded. He pulled their hands back. The golden light faded to a soft, rhythmic throb. The engine settled, its defense mechanism satisfied. The threat had been neutralized, not by death, but by a forced evolution of conscience. Vane lay on the floor, catatonic. His mind had retreated into a corner to hide from the things he had done. Rylan slumped against the node, sliding down to sit on the floor. Sava sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. Did we win? Rylan asked weakly. Sava looked at the weeping soldiers. We didn't lose, she said. And that is a new thing for my people. The aftermath was a long, quiet season of reckoning. The mercenaries were rounded up, but there was no need for chains. Most of them were too psychologically shattered to resist. They sat in the holding pens, staring at the walls, haunted by the sudden acquisition of a conscience. Rylan used the chaos to access the mercenary comms network. He transmitted everything, the flight recorder audio, the annexation orders, the footage of Vane initiating the purge, to every independent news outlet in the sector. The story broke across the Federation like a tidal wave. Ares Vantor couldn't spin it. You can spin a battle. You cannot spin a recording of a director ordering a genocide while a man begs for his life. The stock price crashed. The Senate launched an inquiry. The blockade around Verdun 9 dissolved as ships retreated, terrified of the ghost planet that made you feel your own sins. But the hardest work was in the village. Terran and his faction were not executed. The matriarch ruled that they had suffered enough under the pulse. Instead, they were given the task of rebuilding the resin pods. It was a slow, humble work. Reconciliation was heavy. It was awkward silences and averted eyes. But it was happening. The tribe had felt each other's fear during the pulse, and it was hard to hate someone when you had felt their heart break inside your own chest. A week after the battle, Rylan stood on the high platform, looking out at the jungle. The vines were blue again, calm and watchful. Sava found him there. She was wearing fresh leathers, her hair braided with new feathers. She looked like a queen of the canopy, but her eyes were soft. "The extraction ship is hailing you," she said. Rylan nodded. "I saw the light on the console. They are sending a shuttle down in 1 hour," she said. "To take you back. You are a hero now. Rylan, the man who exposed the conspiracy. You will have your book deal. You will have your fame." Rylan looked at her. He looked at the bandage on her forehead. He looked at the way her hand rested on the hilt of her bone knife. He looked at the shuttle coming down through the clouds in the distance. Then he looked at the black box recorder sitting on the railing. He picked it up and tossed it over the edge. It fell into the undergrowth with a dull thud. Sava raised an eyebrow. "That was your evidence." "I already sent the data," Rylan said. "I don't need the souvenir." He turned to face her. "You know, that night in the sanctuary, after the illusions, you said something." Sava looked away, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I said many things. You said the 7 months weren't just about anger." Rylan pressed gently. Sava sighed. She looked out at the horizon. "I was afraid," she admitted. "I was afraid that I had become hard, that the jungle had turned me into wood and stone. I was afraid that if I let someone touch me, really touch me, I would shatter." She looked back at him. "I thought kindness was a weakness. I thought desire was a trap." "And now?" Rylan asked. Sava stepped closer. She reached out and took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. Her grip was strong, but her skin was warm. Now I know that desire is just another kind of gravity, she said. It holds you to the earth. It keeps you from floating away into the dark. She looked at the shuttle, which was now visible as a glint of metal against the green. You should go, she said, though her hand tightened on his. Your world is waiting. You have a career. You have coffee machines and soft beds and maps that do not lie. Rylan laughed. It was a genuine, happy sound. My world is loud, Sava. It's full of people who talk but don't say anything. It's full of maps that lead to nowhere. He looked at the Ketha village below, the smoke rising from the cooking fires, the children playing in the vines, the slow, hard work of rebuilding. I have spent my whole life trying to be someone else, Rylan said, trying to be important, but down in that core, holding your hand. That was the first time I felt real. He looked her in the eye. I don't want to be a hero in the stars. Sava, I want to be the man who knows the names of the moss. Sava stared at him. The hope in her eyes was terrifyingly bright. It is a hard life. Rylan, the rain is hot, the fruit bites back, and the matriarch will make you weave baskets for a year to prove you are useful. I like baskets, Rylan said. Sava smiled. It was a crooked, blazing thing that lit up her face. The shuttle hovered over the clearing, its engines whining. A voice crackled over the loudspeaker. Passenger Rylan. Prepare for extraction. We are lowering the harness. Rylan reached up to his earpiece. He tapped it once. Pilot, this is Rylan. Go ahead. Rylan, false alarm. Rylan said, there's no passenger here, just non-sovereign biological occupants. You can go home. Repeat, I said I'm home, Rylan said. He pulled the earpiece out and dropped it off the platform. The shuttle hovered for a moment, confused, then banked and shot back up toward the stars. Rylan and Sava watched it go until it was just a spark in the upper atmosphere. Silence returned to the canopy. The insects began to hum. Sava turned to him. She stepped in close, wrapping her arms around his waist. She rested her chin on his chest, looking up at him with a mischievous glint in her golden eyes. You are a fool. Sky man, she whispered. I know, Rylan said, wrapping his arms around her. Sava leaned up and kissed him. It was slow and deep and full of promises. When she pulled back, she ran her thumb over his lip. I haven't seen a man in 7 months, she said softly, the old phrase hanging in the air. Rylan smiled. That's a long time. Sava shook her head. I am not counting the time since I left anymore, she said. She pressed her palm against his heart. I am starting the count from today. Day 1, the day the man stayed. Rylan kissed her hand. Day 1, he agreed. They turned and walked back toward the fires of the village, hand in hand, disappearing into the beautiful, dangerous, living green of the world.